society or culture would say that that's okay. Everyone may agree that that's wrong, but to me that's not the basis for deciding whether something is right or wrong. To me the basis is, again, God, who is absolute truth in my worldview. So the question arises, why should we even treat other cultures with respect? What makes that an absolute value that other cultures have respect? I think they do, but to me, the reason we treat other people with respect and we respect other cultures, again, because of who God is, not for society or cultural reasons.
Thank you. Dr. Luegenbiehl, along that same line of, cultural and moral truths, would you say that there are any moral wrongs in relative truth, and how does that play out in the justice system? Like, how can we convict a criminal if they're simply living out their own truth that they should go kill someone?
Okay, I'm afraid I have to make another philosophical distinction for us to start this out, which is, of course, that there are various forms of relativism. Okay, and we could talk about individual normative relativism, which is what your question is asking about. That morality or whatever we're talking about here, and I think we're kind of now within that framework, is relative to the individual. But there's another position which we call normative cultural relativism, which holds that morality is relative to a particular society. And I guess I'm going to agree this part, right, that we can't really survive as a society if everybody gets to set their own moral rules and just go with those. That de facto means you don't have a society. Okay, the whole notion of a society is based on the idea of what's called a social contract. That is, that we come to some agreement about what rules we're going to follow in that society. Now, the question that arises, right, is the issue of whether different societies can have different rules. And I would say, in principle, if a society is satisfied with the rules it has, then so much the better for them, okay? At least they've exercised their decision-making power in terms of deciding on their rules, okay? But then the question arises in terms of interaction between different societies, okay? Well, that didn't used to be a problem, okay? Because, we didn't have boats, we didn't have airplanes, we didn't have any of those things, okay? And so there wasn't a whole lot of interaction between different societies, okay? But in the modern world, right, there is a lot of interaction, which really means that we are, in a sense, all part of one society nowadays, okay? And we see that in terms of the different kinds of faces I see out here in the audience, okay? Well, how do we exist as a common human society? By making rules that help us get along with each other, okay? Just as in the past, we have had to make rules on a more local level, now we need to make them on a more global level. Unfortunately, okay, the U.S. happens to be a country that really doesn't believe in commonality of rules, okay? To a large extent, we've taken the position it's our rules or nobody's rules. We need to get a little more up to date, I would say, in this process, recognizing that other human beings around the world maybe can also contribute to this process instead of, just kind of rejecting whatever other cultures have to say out of hand. We have traditionally, the dominant Western societies have traditionally, in fact, exhibited an imperialist attitude, okay? It's our truth, that's the right truth. And if you don't believe that it's our truth, we're going to shoot you. Okay? That is not a religious perspective, but it's a political perspective that has been dominant. And that's part of what has to change. Okay? So I think it can be relative truth, but still cover all human beings, because all human beings have to get along with each other.
Thank you. Dr. Cornwell, along that same vein, in the justice system, people often use the context to pass sentences and convict criminals. They'll give varying levels of the sentence depending on, stealing maybe isn't quite as bad if the person was poor and willing to eat food, whereas stealing at a corporate level is viewed as a felony. Would you say that goes along with absolute truth, or is that a contradiction?
I don't see a contradiction with absolute truth and having gradations and considering context in the judicial system. I also strongly agree with Heinz as far as we have been very imperialistic. And I would not call democracy one of the things I would put on absolute truth list. So I do think the United States has been very bad in that particular regard. But as far as the justice system, again, I think, first of all, we're finite humans with imperfect knowledge. And I would say that there are gradations. Jaywalking is different than murdering someone. You still have the problem of why is murdering somebody wrong, other than the society says it's wrong because the society will no longer exist if we allow it to do that. That still, to me, doesn't give a firm foundation of why that would be the case. So I think it's appropriate to have different levels of punishment and extenuating circumstances about when evaluating crimes. We're fallible. We don't know all the facts. In parenting, I used to teach a parenting class, and one of the important qualities of parenting when you're punishing your child is considering the context. Was it willful disobedience? Was it just childishness? What was the situation going on? The act may have been the same, but the motivation behind the child, as far as you can tell, is important. Having said that, I do think there's a difference between a human justice system and God's justice, because I do think God is privy to, he is omniscient, he is privy to all the information. So when he makes a judgment, I think it will be perfectly just. And from his perspective, as if, I'm using a sort of generic sense, from God's perspective, then I think because of at least the way he's been revealed himself to us, and again, what I consider the Bible, I think everyone considers it the Bible, not everyone thinks it's true. But okay, the New Testament documents, and I think it reveals his character to be holy and just, as well as loving and merciful. So when I think any sort of transgression does violate who God is and his perfect holiness. So in that sense, maybe there's not a gradation. From a human sense, I think there is. From God's perspective, I'm not sure.
Thank you. We're going to do one more question for each side, and we'll give you a chance to give some closing thoughts. Dr. Luegenbiehl, with so many competing views on what happens to people in life after death, especially when those views are often blanket statements, like if you're not a Christian, you go to hell, or if you're Buddhist, once you reach enlightenment, then you transcend the circle of suffering. How could those be reconciled with relative truth? Doesn't there have to be some sort of relative truth? Doesn't someone have to be right?
You mean absolute truth?
Yes.
There has to be some absolute truth? Sure. There has to be some answer to what happens to us after we die. My problem is I'm really not sure what that answer is, and don't claim to know, and don't claim that I can tell you. Okay, and I certainly hold that something or other is going to happen. I have my beliefs about that. You have yours. If you feel comfortable with your beliefs, good for you. I feel comfortable with my beliefs, but I really don't know if they're the truth or not. I guess I'm only going to find out when I die. That's the unfortunate fact about the situation. which brings me back to where I started from. This is a big matter of